The man at the county surplus auction shook his head when the lot number was called, like he was embarrassed to be seen selling it. The bus sat crooked in a fence corner of dry weeds, faded teal paint, a blister of rust above each wheel well, the old school district seal ghosting through like a memory someone had tried to scrub away. A gull had dropped a mussel on the roof and left a streak that looked like a white tear. The windshield was spidered in one corner, the tires gone to flat moons. Zoya Farrow knew right away that no one else would want it. She knew it by the silence in the crowd, plumbers and scrap haulers and the usual flinty-eyed resellers, who all pocketed their hands and looked elsewhere when the auctioneer drawled, "Lot 218, 1967 Berlin Vista, sold as is, no title, no guarantee." She felt the tug in her chest she recognized from certain thrift store shelves and roadside boxes where the unwanted things waited for gentler hands. She almost talked herself out of it. She had $57 in her checking account until Friday and a landlord who had left her a note written in hard consonants. But the bus had a smell, old paper, hot dust, a faint thread of something like lavender under the oxidized metal, that made her think of her mother's summer closet, cedar, soap, skin. 200, she said, before the voice in her head could scold her. The number struck the air like a thrown rock. No one countered. The auctioneer blinked, then clapped his gavel on the plywood podium like he was swatting a fly. "Sold, 200 to the lady in the blue jacket." The word lady made her stand straighter. Several men turned to look at Zoya, slim, late 20s, hair tucked in a scarf her mother had embroidered with little silver fish. Her hands trembled as she counted out 20s and 10s, crisp ones from tip jars, and the auctioneer pretended not to notice how much effort it took to peel off the bills. She didn't take possession so much as she walked into a memory. The driver's seat was torn vinyl stuffed with yellow foam guts. A petrified pack of gum lay under the brake pedal, a child's glitter sticker, planets and a rocket ship, decorated the gear panel. Somebody had taped a little plastic saint to the dash and over time the saint had fallen over, arms up like a diver. The aisle ran back between seats whose numbers were hand-painted in white, and at the very end, two benches faced each other across a welded rectangle where a wheelchair platform must have latched. Zoya imagined the driver checking the mirror, calling, "I see you, Daniel," and tapping the brakes to tease the rowdy kids into quiet. She ran her fingers along the seat backs, felt the grit settle into her palm, and let the bus tell her what she already knew. It wanted to carry people again. It wanted to be more than a shed for spiders. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. She stood in the open doorway and breathed. On the far side of the chain-link fence, a river crawled along the edge of town, green and thick with late summer water. In the distance, the sugar mill made its humming like the town's big throat clearing. The sun pressed everything flat. Zoya wiped her face with her sleeve and said, to no one, to the bus, "Okay. If you'll wheel, I'll work." It took the yard man and his forklift, 3 good swear words, and a can of ether to bully the old diesel into a cough. She bought a used battery from a man named Leon who had burned the hair off his knuckles in 6 different engine bays and called every machine sweetheart. He looked at Zoya's hands, saw they weren't the show of someone who didn't work, little scars on the knuckles, a line of salt ash on her thumb, and gave her the battery for cheaper than she deserved. "Why this one?" he asked, tightening the terminals. "Because it looks like me if I were a vehicle," she said, surprising herself. Leon grinned. "Then I guess it's lucky." They limped the bus off the lot at walking speed, a parade of one. People on the sidewalk stared. Someone clapped. Someone else took a picture. Zoya felt ridiculous and radiant. She kept both hands at 10 and 2 like a child with a learner's permit. Every rattle felt like the bus testing her, every new noise a small confession. She eased it into the gravel behind her apartment, next to 2 abandoned shopping carts and a mattress bleached to bone by weather and neglect. The landlord would throw a fit, but the landlord had thrown fits about lesser wonders. Zoya killed the engine, the silence boomed, and listened to the dry tick of cooling metal. For a second she couldn't move. The question rose like heat, what exactly have you done? She had known grief that made all other questions behave. It had taught her tricks for living on small edges. After her mother's illness, after the borrowed oxygen machine and the floral scarves to hide the scalp, Zoya had learned the taxonomy of kindness in a town that preferred privacy. Some people brought casseroles because casseroles had recipes, some stood in doorways twisting their ring like the answer to sickness might be hidden in there. Zoya learned to say, "You can sit with her while I run to the pharmacy," and turn relief into a job. She learned to fold her fear small and tuck it in a pocket while she measured pills. The bus gave her the same kind of fear, big, practical, solvable by attention. What could be more obedient than metal? She could read manuals. She could clean. She could learn. She could love. She found a broom, and then a second, because one broken thing should never have to do the work alone. She swept a semester's worth of grit out the door and shook spiders from the corners. She hauled out the bench cushions, beat them with a stick, watched dust rise like ancient incense. She took a razor blade to the gum under the brake pedal and peeled it away in one stubborn curl. She took photos as she worked, not for the internet, not yet, but for herself, to see the difference between a beginning and a little further along. The neighborhood came by to look. Kids pressed their faces to the doorway. A woman from the laundromat brought a bucket that smelled like lemon and said Zoya could keep it. Mr. Ortiz from across the alley leaned on the chain link and told her he'd driven a bus like this out in New Mexico, back when the desert meant something you could believe in. The landlord came too, hands on hips, dark brows making a roof. He started to say no and then caught the truth in Zoya's face and softened to "We'll talk." "Talk now," she said, because she had learned to stack courage on top of exhaustion until it stood tall enough to meet a gaze. "Give me 2 weeks. If it's still an eyesore, I'll find a yard. I'll sell it for parts and get your gravel back." "What are you even going to do with it?" he asked, genuine curiosity wrestling ugly habit. "I'm going to make a room that moves," she said. "A room that people need." He snorted, but it wasn't unkind. "A room's a room. It's the people who make the need." "Then we'll be even," she said. "Because I have nothing but people." She worked an hour stolen from the sandwich shop where she made coffee strong enough to wake difficult mornings, and from the thrift store where she sorted donations into piles called sometimes and never. She pried up the rubber aisle mat and discovered the floor beneath, pocked, 2 soft spots gone to lace, 1 coin welded to the metal by time and a spilled sugary drink. She learned the names of tools she had only ever borrowed, the oscillating multi-tool that screamed like a kettle, the wire brush that turned rust into comet tails, the can of converter that smelled like science. When she was too tired to stand, she sat on the step and made lists. A sink, salvaged, if she could find one. A short counter. A fold-out table. Light, soft, not the laboratory kind. Curtains on tracks. A small heater. 2 rocking chairs if the weight would allow, so conversation could rock too. A file box. A kettle. An emergency kit. A whiteboard for names, first names only, with a column called today and another called tomorrow. A little shelf for tea. A secret compartment for candy. She did not write what she already knew, because some truths didn't need pen or paper. The bus would be a listening place. Not a therapy office. Zoya had no certificates, only hands and a willingness, but a simple room for stories to be said aloud and held. After her mother died, Zoya had discovered that grief made people leak. You could see it in the grocery store when someone stared too long at the melons and only realized they were crying when they tasted salt. You could see it at the drive-thru when a person would hand you exact change like a test and whisper, "My brother loved chili fries." She wanted a place for leaks that wasn't a parking lot. The first person to step into the bus after the broom was a man who fixed shoes and always had a radio crackling baseball in the corner. Zoya had taken in the boots her mother wore to chemo, not because they needed repair but because she needed to sit where the radio made everything ordinary. Now he came on his lunch break and stood in the aisle with his cap in his hands. He looked at the seats and at the welded rectangle at the back, then at Zoya. "I heard you're making a talking bus," he said, defiant against the ridiculousness. "I'm making a room where talking fits," she said. He nodded as if that was enough. He told her about a boy who had worked for him a summer 10 years ago, quiet kid, liked to take scraps of leather home to make key fobs. The boy had enlisted. The radio had said his name. The man had written it down in a small notebook in case he needed to see it again to make it true. He had never said the name aloud until now. He set it into the bus, and then sat on a seat and took off his cap and turned it in his hands until Zoya put the kettle on and gave him a paper cup of plain hot water and said, "You can stay as long as you want. The bus likes company." By the third day the bus had a name, but only among neighbors, the Teal Room. Someone brought a string of thrift store lamps that Zoya rewired with help from Mr. Ortiz. A woman from the shelter down the block offered a box of fleece blankets, maybe a dozen, all the colors of comfort. Zoya hung a chalkboard where the saint had fallen down and wrote, in careful letters, "Stories held here." She printed a single sheet of paper and taped it by the door. "Free tea. Free chair. You can talk or not talk. We'll write names if you want. You can leave whenever." She did not put her name on it. She didn't want anyone to think they owed her anything but their breath. On the fourth morning, the landlord brought 2 pieces of plywood and an apology for the way he had said eyesore. They patched the soft places in the floor together. "I'm not sentimental," he said, lying, "but the way people walk in and out of this thing like it belongs to them, that's rent enough for now." He would still count the days, Zoya knew. But sometimes Grace needed a ledger too. After the first week, an envelope appeared under the bus wiper with $15 and a note, "For tea and screws." Zoya laughed. Screws did, in fact, need their own budget, and posted a picture of the envelope on the neighborhood forum. She didn't ask for more. She just wrote, "The bus is listening." The city noticed. Of course the city noticed. Cities notice when something looks like it might be love. A man with a clipboard came the next afternoon. Nurse telegraphed by the way he called her ma'am every time he made a point. "You need permits," he said. 2, maybe 3. And insurance if you're inviting the public. And, this is more of a suggestion, maybe a different parking spot. "I have 2 weeks," she said. "Then I'll go." "Go where?" he asked, not unkindly. "Wherever people are," she said. He stared at her, at the string of lamps, at the chalkboard with 5 names, today's names, written in soft, slanted handwriting. He lowered his voice and said, "My mom could use a place like this." "Come back with her," Zoya said. "We have tea." He did. It went like that, a tiny thing that was really a large thing becoming itself. A teenager sat in the last row and let his shoulders drop. He said his father had stopped speaking to him in July, and he wasn't sure if he preferred the earlier screaming. Zoya didn't offer advice. She didn't have the training for advice, and besides, advice had never mended the kind of tear that went all the way through. She asked what the teenager did when he wanted the day to be over faster. He said he counted all the ways light fell on the river. She told him the bus had been waiting for his eyes. A woman came with a baby strapped to her chest and cried while the baby slept. She said she felt like she was watching her life from outside a window. Zoya asked her to describe the window frame. The woman laughed and then cried harder and said, "It's painted green and the paint is peeling and I can't scrape it because the baby always wakes up." Zoya wrote "window, green, peeling" on a card and put the card in a box labeled "Things We Know." A man with a ring-shaped tan on his finger came every day and looked at the kettle and never drank anything. On the 7th day he said, "It wasn't my fault," and Zoya said, "Okay," and on the 9th day he said, "But I didn't stop it either," and Zoya said, "Okay." On the 12th day he brought a tiny fern and asked if the bus could keep it. "We'll try," she said. "We're better at people." The story of the Teal Room grew its own legs. The radio station did a small segment. A blogger took photographs that made the bus look noble it didn't yet deserve. Zoya fielded emails with a borrowed laptop and a borrowed bravery. She learned to say, "I'm not a counselor, I'm a holder," and found that people understood. Some people were angry anyway. They said grief belonged to professionals or churches, not to a woman with a kettle and an old bus. Zoya didn't argue. She brewed tea. She wrote names. On the second Friday, Leon from the battery showed up with a box of fuses and a smile. "Your marker light shorted, sweetheart," he said to the bus itself. "Let me make you legal as the law will allow." He crouched under the dash with a flashlight in his mouth, humming something that might have been Sinatra. Zoya sat in the doorway and watched the sky stain itself pink and gray. She could feel the bus all the way up her arms. It happened then, the thing that would braid the bus into the town so tightly you could no longer separate them. A woman walked up with a folder hugged to her chest. She had hair cut in a way that said, "I once forgot myself and now I'd like to meet me again." She had the face of someone who had slept badly for a decade and woke every hour to make sure the house was still standing, even when there was no obvious fire. "My name is Hester," she said, voice raspy as a path through pine needles. "I worked at Pleasant Hills for 27 years. Pleasant Hills was the long-term care place where Zoya had learned the squeaks of the hallway floor. Where she had learned the dignity of warm socks and the reverence of small spoons. "They closed our wing last month," Hester said. "Sent our folks in all directions like you'd shuffle a deck." Zoya stood aside and let Hester into the bus, and the bus felt smaller, like a shell listening to the sea. Hester put the folder on the center seat and opened it. Inside were photocopies, pages, pages. Names. Dates of birth. Allergies. Emergency contacts. "I took these because I didn't know what else to take," Hester said. "All their stories are in rooms that changed overnight." Her hand shook. "You said you write names." "We do," Zoya said, and her voice broke on the we. "Then write these," Hester said. "Write them where someone will see." They began. Zoya printed in chalk while Hester said the names aloud, each one with its place in Hester's voice. A little lift for the ones who liked peppermint candies, a little hush for the ones who preferred the window bed. People walking by slowed. Someone stopped. Someone else read a name and said, "Oh," and then softly, "Oh." By sundown the entire chalkboard was names and the window glass was names on paper taped in neat columns by Leon's careful hands. The bus breathed like a living thing. Hester held the photocopies close and then let go of them, and Zoya put the pages into the file box and labeled the people we are holding. That night Zoya barely slept. She dreamed the bus grew roots and anchored itself in the gravel, green threads pushing down past pipes and old coins. In the morning, 3 people were already waiting when Zoya arrived, and she learned something new. You can open a door and find your whole life on the other side without knowing you installed the hinges yourself. The day moved like a tide. People came and went. Names were added. Names were circled when someone wanted them read aloud at dusk. Zoya learned to time the kettle between stories. She learned to keep a tiny trash can under the seat for used tissues and to tie the bag with reverent fingers. In the late afternoon, when the river light went to polished brass, a man in a suit climbed the bus steps, which was unusual at that hour. Suits came in the morning, when they could pretend they had happened upon the bus on the way to something more important. He did not look around first. He went straight to the chalkboard like a man who had navigated by lists his whole life. "Who wrote these names?" he asked. His suit was very blue and very careful. "We did," Zoya said. "Together. Did anyone give you permission?" Zoya felt the floor tilt. "Some of them are written by the people themselves," she said. "Some were given to us by their people. Some were asked for. We don't keep last names unless someone insists. This is the kind of thing that creates liability," he said. "And the parking? I've had 2 emails and 1 phone call from a concerned citizen who doesn't like crowds and alleys." Zoya could feel all the work of the last 2 weeks rise in her throat like a plea. "We are careful," she said, and we met everyone who had sat in the bus and made it larger. "We clean. We close the door when we need to. We walk people home. He lifted a hand. "I'm not here to shut you down," he said, surprising her. "I'm here to tell you that you'll be shut down unless you move." He looked at the bus the way a veterinarian looks at a dog that has taught a child to read. "There's a lot of ordinance between you and what you are trying to do, Ms. Pharaoh, she said. Zoya. He nodded like he'd expected something else. I can help you do the paperwork. If you help me believe this is safe. How do we do that? She asked. He did not answer with a list. He answered with a name. My sisters, he said, pointing to the board. There, in Zoya's slanted hand, was Erin, circled. She doesn't like rooms, he said. She likes buses. He swallowed. She hasn't left her apartment in 6 months. Then we'll bring the room to her, Zoya said. Can you even drive this thing? He asked, as if the grief and the diesel were equally suspect. Zoya smiled. Barely, she said. But I can learn. They planned it like a heist, a short route, a quiet street, someone to walk ahead to make sure cats and children were accounted for. Zoya asked Leon to listen for new rattles as she eased the bus around the corner. The landlord stood at the alley mouth with his arms crossed and a look that translated to if you'd a hydrant, I never met you. The city man, the suit, sat on the step and held the rail like a pilgrim. They found Erin in an upstairs room with the blinds half closed. She had good hair in need of a native habitat, a breeze maybe, or different light. She steadied herself on the stair railing and walked toward the bus as if she had been practicing in small rooms, 2 steps, rest, 2 steps. When she put her foot on the bus step, the entire neighborhood seemed to inhale. Zoya met her in the doorway. Welcome to the teal room, she said, and the bus felt it, the recognition of its own name, like a shiver through metal. Erin smiled like someone pushed a light up under her chin, and when she sat down, she touched the seat like it was a lap. The suit stood awkwardly by the door. He was more brother than bureaucrat now. You have tea? Erin asked. We have everything, Zoya said, and meant it. Erin told a story about a pond that existed exactly once when she was 9, after a storm knocked the world slightly off its axis and a field by her grandparents' house filled to the brim. She said she dreamed about the pond most nights, the cattails leaning like kind old men, the dragonflies teaching the air to write. Zoya wrote pond, once, on a card and put it in the box, as if you could catalog miracles and make them common. When Erin left the bus, she was taller. The suit shook Zoya's hand like she had completed something official. I'll file the permits, he said. You file the names. They drove back to the alley in a quiet, triumphant caravan. The river reflected a pink strip of sky like someone had peeled the day and left one ribbon. Zoya parked the bus at an angle so the evening crowd could use the steps like a porch. The kettle sighed. Hester would be back in the morning with more names. Zoya felt her whole body turn toward tomorrow like a plant. In the dark belly of the bus, under the last bench, she found the drawer. She hadn't seen it before, it was disguised as frame, screwed shut with 2 old flatheads. She lay on her side in the aisle and reached under and felt the rough rectangle and the cool circle of a brass pole. She fetched a driver from her toolbox and worried the screws loose one by one, each coming free with the cracked sigh of varnish gone brittle. The drawer stuck and then, with a soft shudder, came open. Inside were letters bound with twine. Dozens, at least, maybe more. Some were addressed in careful kid's print to Miss Baines, some to Dear Bus, some to nobody in particular. The postmarks were smudged and various, some envelopes bore stickers shaped like stars, others had little brown watermoons where tears had fallen and dried. The smell in the drawer was the smell that had found her at the auction, old paper and lavender. Zoya sat cross-legged on the aisle floor and set the first stack on her knees. Leon had gone, the alley was quiet. The river did its domestic shushing. She unpicked the twine and opened the top letter. Inside was a drawing in crayon, wobbly blue hearts and a stick figure wearing a scarf with silver fish. Zoya pressed her fingers to her own scarf and felt the embroidery like a pulse. The note said, "Thank you for stopping when my brother fell. You let him cry and you let me cry too and nobody got in trouble. I hope buses can hear. Love, M." Zoya turned to the next envelope. It was from a woman with a slanted hand that leaned like it wanted to be held up. I never knew you could sit in a moving thing and be still. I never knew someone could hand me a tissue without asking me to stop. Thank you for bringing the room to the place where my fear lived. She read until the dark gilded the paper. Some letters were decades old. Some were from last spring. The teal room had predecessors, sister buses, cousin rooms. There had been a traveling counselor once, maybe two. There had been a driver who kept peppermints and a driver who hummed and a driver who taught a quiet boy to read the bus schedule like a secret map. The drawer was a time capsule of tenderness. Zoya felt tears come in the old way, hot, private, grateful. A footstep on the gravel didn't startle her. The bus gave warning by the way it shifted its weight and asked the aisle to behave. It was the landlord. "You're still in here," he said, softer than she'd ever heard him. "I found something," she said. He stepped up and stood without asking to be invited. She didn't mind. They had patched a floor together, that made you kin for at least one winter. He looked down at the letters and then around at the soft lamps and the chalk names and the kettle. He took off his cap and held it like the shoe repairman had held his. "My wife," he said, and the word cracked right up the middle. "Her sister is on that board." He pointed to the name Erin, and the surprise in Zoya's chest was like a small bird opening its wings. The suit's sister, circled. "We brought the bus," she said. She came down. He nodded without looking at Zoya, a man talking to a room, not a woman, and said, "I don't want to not be the kind of person who could have thought of this." "You are the kind of person who brought plywood," Zoya said, and he laughed, startled to be forgiven. He climbed back down without asking for a letter. He left the bus door open, and the night came in like soft rain. In the morning, the city returned, but not with the suit. A white truck with a blue stripe. Orange cones. A tow rig. The kind of equipment that makes a dream turn into an object again. A young man in a safety vest held a clipboard like it was his first shield. "Ma'am, we have a complaint," he said. "Three, actually. We have to move this vehicle. It's on a commercial lot without." 2 weeks, Zoya said, heat flashing through her like good coffee. "I have 2 weeks. We're applying for permits." "Permits aren't guarantees," he recited. "And, there's an event scheduled for the alley tonight. The Merchant Association." His voice slid into apologies so quickly it made Zoya's anger lose a step. "I'm really sorry." Neighbors gathered like weather gathers at a fence line. Hester's eyes were thunderheads. The shoeman folded his arms across his apron like an argument. Erin arrived with a determination that made gravity reconsider. The landlord stood with his cap in his hand and his mouth a straight nail. "We can move it by hand," someone said. "We can push." "It doesn't start cold without coaxing," Zoya said, trying to think about levers instead of losing. "We can do it if Leon." Leon arrived running, a genius of timing. "Your luck," he told the bus, "is showing." He slid under the front end with the grace of a dancer and called for a socket. The tow driver hovered, uncomfortable with so much loving attention given to an object he had been told was a nuisance. "I don't want to tow it," he said. "I want to drink tea in it." "Then we're already on the same side," Zoya said, and the tow driver smiled and stood down as far as a tow driver can stand down with a clipboard. They got the engine to cough, and again, and then they got it to find its own breath. Zoya climbed into the driver's seat. The kettle rattled. The chalkboard whispered with its taped papers like leaves. She checked her mirrors. She put her hand on the gear lever like you put your hand on a patient's shoulder before the hard part. "Where?" she asked. "Riverfront," Hester said. "There's shade." "Not under the sycamores," the landlord said. "Birds." "The old ferry landing," Erin said quietly. "There's a breeze and the light is kind." Zoya nodded. She put the bus in drive and felt the lurch that would have terrified her 2 weeks ago but now felt like a friend daring her to trust. The caravan reformed around them, people on bikes, people on foot, a dog carrying its own leash. The tow truck followed at a respectful distance like a chaperone. At the landing they pulled in beside the river where the concrete sloped down to the water like a held breath. Someone strung the thrift store lamps between a light post and the bus's open door. Someone set the kettle on a camp stove. People wrote new names on new paper. A boy with a harmonica made one brave song that sounded more like a prayer than music, and the bus hummed along in metal. Afternoon into evening, the teal room became what it had always wanted to be, a public secret. A place you might pass and then find yourself inside without remembering how you decided. Zoya wrote pond, once, on the board at Aaron's request, and underneath it she wrote river, always. People laughed and then didn't. They put their hands on the bus's side like you would steady a friend. Toward dusk, a man in a cap that said Pleasant Hills janitor in faded thread came up the ramp with a small box. His name patch said Lloyd. He set the box on the step and said, "Found these when they emptied my closet. Figure they belong to the same planet as you." Inside were a stack of cassette tapes, each labeled in a different hand. Mrs. D, story about the dog / Tim's music / H, singing / prayer, winter. A small tape recorder lay on top with a cracked play button. Zoya looked at Hester and Hester looked at Zoya, and the bus felt, in its bones, the exact sliver of a second when two people decide whether to risk a magic. "Play 1, Aaron whispered. Zoya set the recorder on the driver's dash where everyone could see it. She pressed play. The tape hissed like rain behind a door, and then a voice rose out of the little speaker, clear, hesitant, grateful. "This is me," the voice said. "I want to remember my own voice." The river stopped pretending it was separate from time. People put their hands to their mouths and didn't know why. Zoya gripped the wheel like it was the railing of a ship. She watched the eyes in front of her grow wet for reasons older than any ordinance. When the tape ended, nobody spoke. Then Hester said, "Again." Zoya pressed rewind and then play, and the same voice arrived, braver now, and the bus felt its roof lift like someone had set down the world for a minute to rest. Lights flickered. Not the thrift lamps, the street lights along the river. A second later the bus faltered, an electric hiccup, and the tape recorder died. "Breaker," Leon said, "already moving." He crouched by the electrical cabinet he'd helped Zoya bolt to the floor and frowned at the tangle inside. "We're drawing more than she can give," he said. "Between the kettle and the lights and the tape." Zoya turned the kettle off. Someone turned 2 lamps down to their lowest. The tape recorder stammered back to life, one thin bar of and then went silent again. "Generator," the tow driver said. "I've got one in the truck." He looked almost shy. "They make us carry them." "Get it," Zoya said, and he ran. The river smelled like wet pennies. The sky signed itself with late light. People waited without fidgeting the way people do at hospitals or on nights when someone is not born and not yet gone. The tow driver returned with a small machine, and Leon set it a good distance from the bus so its sound would be a separate animal. He ran a cord, checked a plug, nodded to Zoya. The tape recorder came back like a candle relit from another candle. "This is me," the voice said again, and again people stood exactly as they were and cried. Zoya didn't realize she was shaking until Aaron put a hand on her back, warm through the fabric. "You did this," Aaron said. "No," Zoya whispered. "The bus did. We only listened." It would have ended there, with dusk and a small miracle and the feeling of a town being sewn to itself with soft thread. It would have ended with thank yous and the careful winding of cords and the bus taking a deep breath and sleeping beneath the sycamores. It would have ended with Zoya washing the kettle at home and setting the letters back in their drawer like eggs. It did not end there. A siren yelped once downtown, a short bright dog's bark. Then a second. The sound bounced off the river and came back thinner. People looked toward the bridge. A police cruiser shot past and then another. Far away, a plume of black smoke unrolled itself above the roofline like a terrible ribbon tossed by a careless god. "Where?" Hester asked. "The mill," someone said. "Or the warehouse by the mill." The harmonica boy put his instrument into his pocket without closing it, the note trapped like a moth. Zoya felt the bus tense under her, no movement, but a readiness, a coil. A call-in captured the tow driver's radio, words braided together, fire/evacuate/chemical storage/wind shift. "Wind." Zoya looked at the river and then at the sky, and in the small distance between them she saw what would happen if the wind turned just so. Smoke rolled like in tension. The tow driver's face went pale. "Folks," he said, voice dropping to a register that made everyone listen. "They're going to close the riverfront. We have to move." "Where?" Zoya asked, but there was no gentle answer now. The bus felt it, the difference between a practiced crisis and the kind that picks you up by the back of your shirt. "We get up the grade," Leon said. "Not far. Just to the library lot." The tow driver nodded. "Go now." People grabbed what their hands reached for: blankets, the kettle, the tape recorder, the generator. Hester scooped up the file box of names. Aaron took the chalkboard by its frame and hugged it like a child. Zoya turned the key in the bus, faithful, stubborn, brave, answered with a cough and then with the great steady thrum of a heart you can hear from the next room. They began to climb the ramp, slow as prayer, the river falling away behind them. The bus wheezed, then gathered itself. Zoya felt the wheel fight the slope and felt herself love the fight. Halfway up, a city pickup blocked the lane, lights flashing, a man waving. "Not this way," he shouted over the engine. Detour left. The wind. Left was the old ferry road, narrow and rippled, ending in a gate that nobody had opened since the season when the town thought ferrying might rescue it from the future. Zoya swung the wheel. The bus complained, then complied. The caravan fractured, some people running ahead, others falling behind. The tow driver took the generator like a baby. Leon rode the front step like a figurehead, shouting which potholes were liars and which were true. Smoke slid across the sky, the light went bruise-colored. The bus's headlights gilded the gate, the padlock, the chain, the certainty that some things meant no. The tow driver jumped down and cut the chain with a tool that had probably never in its life been asked to do anything noble. The gate swung wide. Zoya breathed. They made the turn and felt the road drop. Hester shouted from the back, "Watch the slope." Leon slapped the roof twice, his code for hold steady, and Zoya held the wheel like a promise. The river flashed between trees, dark with the wrongness of evening smoke. And then the bus shuddered. Not the good shudder, not the "I'm old but game." A wrong shudder, bone deep, a call from the undercarriage like a groan in a house you trust. Zoya felt the brake pedal go soft under her foot, wrong at the hinge, wrong in the way that makes time step to the side. "Brakes," she shouted. "Brakes are." The word failed. The bus began to slide. Not fast, terrifyingly slow, the kind of slow that gives you time to inventory all the lives on board. Hester clutched the file box to her chest. Aaron reached for the chalkboard and then for Zoya's shoulder and then for the rail. Leon was already moving, one hand on the emergency brake, his face a calm she wanted to drink. The tow driver stood in the open door, hand out like a traffic cop trying to stop physics. "Gear down!" Leon yelled. Zoya jammed the shifter. The engine screamed. The bus slowed and then, with awful courtesy, continued to roll. The ferry road curled to the right and Zoya saw in the peripheral future the place where the asphalt broke and the broken asphalt met the river like a handshake not meant for hands. She kept her eyes on the road and her heart in her throat and found her mother's voice in her ear as distinctly as if the scarf's silver fish had learned to whisper, "Steady now, Beatty." Gentle hands. The bus turned, a whale between tides. It skidded another yard and then another. The people inside were quiet in the way people are when they have handed their bodies to someone else's skill. Leon pumped the emergency brake in a rhythm that made an argument and the bus considered it and then continued to go. "Chalk," someone shouted from outside, as if a human could wedge a stop under all this old steel. The tow driver disappeared and reappeared with a block of wood he must have kept for unlucky days. He threw himself at the back wheel, wedged the block, shoved with his shoulder like love was a lever. The bus slowed. The block held. The bus stopped. People exhaled. Someone cried like a laugh. Zoya rested her forehead on the rim of the wheel and felt the thread between her and the bus stretch taut and not break. "Okay," Leon said. "Okay." He looked down at his hands like he had found a new part he didn't remember installing. We can set her with the brake. We can wait for the road to clear. We can, he trailed off. The tow driver's face was white with relief. He had his hand on the back wheel like he was checking a fever. That block, he said to no one in particular, was from my dad's shop. I almost took it out of the truck this morning. Zoya lifted her head. The smoke had shifted more. The wind had made a decision. The air tasted like rain that wasn't rain. She could see flickers on the water where the mill's second building burned, reflected in lengths. Get out, she said, too softly at first. Then louder. Everybody out, careful, one at a time, keep your hands on the rail. We need to lighten her. They moved, disciplined by the right kind of fear. The bus rose a small fraction as weight left. The kettle went. The blankets. The file box of names. The chalkboard. The tape recorder. Aaron's hand. Zoya kept her foot on the brake as if it might remember how to be strong. She watched each person descend and touch the tow driver's shoulder at the bottom like a ritual invented on the spot. When the last neighbor stepped onto the gravel, Zoya stood. Her legs argued. She put the bus in park out of habit even though park would not be the spell they needed. She touched the dash where the saint had fallen and whispered, "Stay." She was the last one at the top of the steps when the siren changed pitch on the bridge, a new urgency, a new instruction. The wind, fickle king, turned a little more. Smoke rolled down the ferry road like a thing with ankles. Zoya. Hester called, one arm full of names, the other extended. Come on. Zoya took one step down. The bus shifted a whisper, the kind of whisper you only hear when you have been listening to the same body for days. The block of wood creaked. The tow driver's fingers tightened. A bolt somewhere considered its options. Zoya turned back and saw, in the very last row by the welded rectangle where a wheelchair had once latched, a shadow. A small shape. A forgotten backpack. A pair of eyes. The harmonica boy, he had gone back for his instrument without a sound and now sat frozen between the heartbeats of a mistake. Don't move, Zoya said, and then louder, don't move. Outside, the river flexed. The smoke wrote a black letter across the sky. Leon looked at the block like he could charm gravity. The tow driver whispered a word his father would have recognized. Zoya put her hand on the rail. She stepped back up. The bus sighed. The wood moaned. She met the boy's eyes and saw her own reflected there, what she had been 2 weeks ago, someone about to decide whether to be afraid or brave. Come to me, she said. Slow. He lifted the harmonica as if to hand it to her and the bus gave a soft lurch, like memory letting go of a name. The block slipped the smallest possible distance. The tow driver shouted. Hester tightened her grip on the file box. The siren on the bridge flared into a slash of sound. Zoya reached out her hand. And the bus began to move again. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. Move again. It moved with the resigned weight of an old animal that had already given its best gallop and was now being asked for one more step on a bad leg. Zoya felt the slide through the soles of her shoes, the way the aisle tilted by a fingernail of a degree and turned gravity into a vote. The harmonica boy clutched the instrument to his chest, his eyes 2 dark coins in a small, pale face. Look at me, she said. Not at the door. At me. He did. The tow driver braced the wheel with his shoulder till his teeth rattled. Leon pumped the emergency brake with the practiced patience of a man coaxing a bolt to remember its threads. Hester, below, held the file box tight enough to leave a ledger of her fingers in the cardboard. Aaron stood with the chalkboard hugged against her, in case the wind tried to read every name at once and carry them off. Slide your foot, Zoya said, her voice thin with borrowed calm. Just one. Keep your weight low. You don't need to hurry. You only need to move. The boy slid one sneaker. The bus sighed, a long low hinge of breath. The block creaked. Smoke crowded the tree line like a rumor that had come true. Somewhere up on the bridge a voice on a bullhorn said the word evacuate and then said it again in a voice that tried not to be frightened. The boy moved another inch and then another, and Zoya, with the steadiness she'd learned at medicine cabinets and oxygen machines, crossed back up the aisle as if she had spent her whole life walking in rooms that did not want to stay still. She reached him. She did not snatch. She offered her hand like a contract signed in pencil, forgiving and real. "I've got you," she said. "I thought I left it," he whispered, holding up the harmonica like proof. "I wanted to say thank you to the voice." "We'll say it together," she said. "But first we step." They stepped. She was a fulcrum, a hinge, a small living ramp. The bus rolled the width of a breath, then considered the block again. Leon whispered, "Come on, sweetheart," not to Zoya, not to the boy, but to the bus itself, and the bus, proud, dented, tender, obeyed that old mechanic's prayer as if it remembered being called sweetheart by men with burned knuckles all the way back to 1967. At the threshold the wind hit them with a taste of bitterness from the mill, a smell like old rubber and the inside of a blown-out match. The boy hopped the last 2 inches to the step and someone's arms, Hester's, came up to receive him. He turned once, like the instincts of children and sailors, and offered Zoya the harmonica. "Hold it," he asked, as if metal could anchor metal. "I'll hold it till you ask for it back," she said, and slid it into her jacket pocket like a pledge. Then she turned and faced the aisle once more, because there were still things inside that were not meant to burn, a box of letters that smelled like lavender, the tape recorder, the kettle that had learned the timing of stories, a drawer that had taught her what a bus could be. "Zoya!" Leon called. "Leave it." 2 minutes, she said. 1 minute. She moved fast now, but not foolish. The letters first, of course the letters, and the tape recorder that held a voice that had learned itself, and the saint fallen on his back like a diver midair. By the time she reached the door again, the wind had made a new decision. Ash began to fall, soft as moths. She looked back once, for the aisle that had become a spine, for the benches that had become ribs, for the old gum scar where she had cleaned away someone else's stubbornness. "Stay," she told the bus again, as if the word could be a rope. And then she was outside and the tow driver was pulling the block like a tooth and the bus, relieved of weight and obligation, settled onto the brake with a groan that meant tired more than failing. The river took a breath and held it. The ferry road, contrary by nature, decided to be kind for 1 more minute. They moved as a single animal up the grade, people with blankets and names and a battered kettle and a thrift store string of lamps, and in the middle of them all, a bus that had learned to carry people without moving an inch. At the library lot, flat, clean, concrete like a promise, Zoya parked and turned the key and the engine fell into silence with a grateful shiver. A collective exhale rose, ragged and embarrassed, because relief is always a little shy. Sirens stitched the town from every direction. The plume over the mill shouldered itself wider, then tore into 2 plumes like a sentence divided by a terrible comma. A city alert chimed on a dozen phones at once, shelter in place north of the river. Evacuate south of the river. Smoke expected to shift overnight. Aid station at the high school gym. Avoid Riverside and Mill. "Of course they'll put an aid station in a gym," Hester said, voice already practical. "Every town thinks comfort looks like basketball." She set the file box on the bus step like a guest registry. "We'll go there when we catch our breath." But first, she opened the box and looked at the names and then up at Zoya. "First we hold them here, where holding has a shape." They made the teal room in the library lot in less time than any of them would have believed. Lamps up, cords run, generator low and far. The kettle resumed its familiar, miraculous work, water to heat, heat to steam, steam to cups, cups to hands. Aaron rewrote the chalkboard, because the wind had smudged the first chalk into an unreadable tenderness. Leon crawled under the dashboard and spoke to the fuses in the same tone he had once used with an unwilling dog. "You are good. You are better than this. You will be what we need." The tow driver sat on the step, helmet between his knees, and stared at the harmonica in Zoya's pocket with an expression that would later make sense to her. he looked like a man who had just understood that something he'd been carrying every day might actually save a life. They worked until the sky forgot its color and then remembered another. Somewhere between blue and black, the first of the mill workers arrived, women with soot in their hair, men with streaks on their cheeks where clean tears made tracks through dirt. They stood at the bottom of the bus steps like people waiting to be measured for something that wasn't clothes, a weight, a loss, a new idea of themselves. "We have tea," Zoya said to the first one, because it was the sentence she knew that meant come in. "We don't know who's missing," the woman said, not moving. Her hands were empty, which is a kind of wound. They kept calling names and some answered and some didn't, and the list is wrong. The list is always wrong. "Then write your names," Zoya said, "and we'll say them aloud at dusk." But dusk had already passed. "We'll say them aloud at the hour when people set their alarms for the morning and the morning isn't certain." She put a cup in the woman's hands. The woman had to decide to hold it. She did. The bus filled. There are ways rooms change shape when the right people enter them. The teal room stretched without seeming larger. Space made room for itself like bread rising. Stories touched sleeves like static. A man with a face like a door left open too long sat in the driver's seat, Zoya's seat, and whispered into the tape recorder, "If I forget what my father's laugh sounded like, this will remind me." The recorder clicked in word, sweetly, defiantly outdated. Someone switched it off and then on again like restarting a heart. A teenager in a soot-streaked hoodie wrote a single word on the chalkboard under the heading "River, always home?" and then sat down and didn't move until someone said, "Your question mark is beautiful." He smiled once, fiercely, a sunrise behind smoke. Aaron read the names in a voice that had learned its own spine. Hester wrote new ones on paper when chalk ran out. Leon found a way to wire the thrift lamps to the generator so that they pulsed like breathing instead of buzzing like flies. The tow driver went silent, then found himself telling a woman he'd never met about the block of wood he'd thrown under the bus in his father's shop and the way his father stood when he measured twice and cut once. The woman listened as if a measurement could be an inheritance. Zoya moved among them, steady as she could be. She felt more useful than she had when she'd balanced hospital clipboards under fluorescent lights. She felt truer than she had when she'd sorted clothing in the thrift store by seasons people pretended not to outgrow. Here, usefulness and truth had found one another, had shaken hands, had agreed to share a room. She tilted, once, when she saw a boy's hands that looked like her own hands at 8, ringed with grime and tender at the knuckles. She turned that tilt into tea. She turned a tremor into a tissue. She learned the names of 3 plants on the windowsill of a man who had never told anyone he kept plants. She pressed the harmonica into its owner's palm and watched the courage climb his throat like a ladder rung by rung until he played one small tune that sounded like a door held open for the whole town. Hours dissolved. Time isn't the same in rooms where grief is host and love is staff. Midnight came through the bus door like a friend who knows where the glasses live. 2 in the morning sat on the step and tied its shoe. At 4, when ambulances yawned most, a volunteer from the high school gym brought a stack of bottled water and a rumor that the fire was contained, a word that means something different to everyone who hears it. At dawn, the smoke thinned into a ghost of its former bravado. The sky tried on some color and kept one. The river returned to the job of being water instead of mirror. The teal room smelled like steam and pencil shavings and human breath. The chalkboard was so full of names that Aaron started a second on the window, and then a third, until the bus looked like a ship wallpapered with prayers. The suit arrived then, the one who had become brother first and bureaucrat second. He looked like a person who had slept in a chair and remembered to be grateful for chairs. He climbed the steps, saw the cassette recorder, the kettle, the names, the way the bus held people as if it had been built for it. "I filed everything I can file," he said, voice rough. "If anyone tries to move you, they'll have to move me too." Zoya nodded. She did not trust her voice to be only voice. She set a cup in his hands. He didn't drink. He held it. That was enough. Morning brought news the way morning always does, too late, too soon, opportunely cruel. There had been a collapse at the mill's old warehouse. There had been a rescue. There had been a death. There had been a man who carried 2 people out and disappeared. There had been a woman who refused to leave until someone found her dog. There had been a dog who guided 2 firefighters to a corner they might not have checked. The town did what towns do on days like that, it divided itself into teams of doing. The gym collected blankets and collapsed. The church made a list and worried it. The city taped sawhorses across streets it had always hoped to keep open. The teal room became a hinge, not between politics and policy but between breath and the next breath. At noon, an older man in a canvas jacket climbed the steps and stopped dead. His name Patch Red Baird. He had the posture of someone who had carried heavy things for a very long time and wanted to argue with anything that looked like ease. "Who are you?" he asked. He did not mean Zoya. He meant the room itself. "We're the bus," Zoya said. He looked at the brown tape recorder on the dash, the chalkboard, the string of lamps. His mouth went hard, then softer. "My wife couldn't do chemo in rooms with closed doors," he said. "She'd get halfway down the hall and turn to stone. Some days the only way I could get her there was to put her in our camper and park outside and," he made a useless circle with his hands, "and let the room move under her while everything else stayed still." Zoya felt the drawer with the letters heavy in her lap though she wasn't holding it. "Would you like to sit?" He sat. He did not speak for a long time. Then he said, "I'm the kind of man who likes to pay a thing back if it helps me." "You don't owe us anything," Zoya said, because she always said that first. "It's how you keep gifts from turning into debts." He set a key on the seat between them. Old brass. A tag worn smooth. "You do now," he said, "because some people need their thanks to have weight. There's a garage on Pine, near the cannery. It's mine and it isn't mine anymore. There's a bay door tall enough for a bus and a roof that doesn't leak. The breaker panel's older than me but it's honest. If you want it, take it. First and last month is the same price, stories." Zoya did not pick up the key. She looked at it like a stone handed down a river. "We can't afford a lease," she said, "honesty first, because honesty is the only currency that doesn't collapse in bad weather." Baird shrugged. "I didn't say lease." He glanced at the chalkboard. "I said take it." He cleared his throat. "You can give it back when the names stop coming." "They don't stop," Hester said from the doorway, almost apologetically. "They only alphabetize themselves differently." Baird smiled like a door cracked open to let in air. "Then I guess the garage belongs to the bus until the bus belongs to the town." "He's trying to say he's donating it," the tow driver said helpfully from the step, "because it's easier for one man to narrate another man's kindness." "I'm trying to say," Baird corrected, "that the day you move out, you won't owe me a thing." He stood, embarrassed by his own generosity now that he'd spoken it aloud. "There's a roll-up bed in the back office. It's ugly as sin. Don't throw it away. It knows how to hold exhausted people without squeaking." He paused. "And there's a safe. Nothing in it but a jar of screws and a Polaroid of a dog named Lucky. But the safe is heavy and sometimes that's what a room needs, one heavy thing to keep the wind from taking it." He left the key on the seat. He left before anyone could make a ceremony out of it. Zoya picked up the brass and felt it warm under her fingers like a small animal. The second day after the fire, the town learned to walk around its own cordons. The ferry road reopened. The riverfront stayed closed. The gym turned its generosity into lists and pickup times. The teal room moved to the garage on Pine as if pulled by a tide. Baird's place was everything he'd promised and 2 comforts more. The bay door rose like a curtain in a theater that staged repairs. There was a wall of old license plates, a calendar permanently on July 1998, a glass jar of marbles the color of kiddie pools, and a fan that remembered summers when work meant sweat in a way nobody resented. In the back office, the bed waited, ugly and resplendent. The safe made its square, faithful case for heaviness. Zoya backed the bus into the bay and breathed as the roof shadow made a room inside a room. The lamps looked right stringing from ceiling hooks meant for brake drums. The chalkboard leaned handsomely against a beam. The kettle found a new outlet. The cassette recorder sat on the windowsill like a cat. Neighbors brought things the way people bring casseroles to funerals, not what you need, exactly, but proof they are thinking. A woman delivered a rug that had belonged to her aunt and always wanted to meet more shoes. A man rolled in a bookshelf on a dolly like a proud uncle of lumber. A kid arrived with a shoebox of seashells and asked if the bus could keep them. "We like small oceans," Zoya said, and tucked them in the drawer with the letters. She worked because that's what Zoya did when the wind changed. She made lists and checked outlets and learned the sound of a building. Between steps she felt the new weight in her pocket, the key, warming to her like it had figured out to whom it belonged. When she sat to drink a cup of her own tea for the first time in 3 days, the body she'd ignored walked up to her and introduced itself. "Hi, I'm Sore. Nice to finally meet you." The suit stopped by with a clipboard that had turned into a shield. "You're technically in violation of 5 things I'm not going to list," he said. "But you're within the latitude of 6 others, and we're going to claim those till somebody smarter than me says otherwise." He glanced at Aaron, who was drawing a map of the room in white chalk on black paper as if to teach the space its own corners. "Also," he said, "my sister slept. She hasn't slept through a night in months." He swallowed. "So if anyone wants this bus gone, they can come take it from my mother." "Your mother," Zoya said, smiling into her cup. "I would like to meet the origin of your well-timed threats." "Later," he said, but the word later sounded less like a delay and more like a promise to bring cake. They would have settled there, for a season, a garage turned into a hinge, a bus that learned how to rest between trips, a town that found its breath and practiced keeping it. But stories do not settle in places that begin with fire. They migrate. They breed complications. They cast shadows forward. On the 3rd evening, when the sky was the exact color of the scarf with silver fish, a woman arrived who did not step fully inside. She stood with one hand on the door frame like a sprinter waiting for the gun. She wore a jacket with a logo Zoya did not recognize and carried herself like someone accustomed to rooms bending toward her. "My name is Kala Rai," she said. "I'm with Northfield Media." Nobody answered because the bus did not recognize titles that sounded like polished stones. "We'd like to feature your story," she said into the quiet. "Documentary short. We think it will help you raise money, get permits, scale." She gestured with her chin at the chalkboard. "Whatever this is, it's good. But good needs a plan." Hester's eyes narrowed with the respect she always gave to well-intentioned strangers. She looked for their useful pockets. "Plan us, then," she said softly. "But don't evaporate us." Kala smiled like someone who had watched water boil and assumed all steam was optional. "That's what we do. Make a thing bigger without making it thinner." She held up a contract and a pen. "We'll need signatures. Releases. A shooting schedule." The room bristled because contracts feel like wind at memorials and because cameras can make grief practice its face. Zoya did not bristle. She asked instead, "What would you do with our drawer?" "Your drawer?" "The letters," Zoya said. "From the first bus. From the other rooms. The ones who asked to be remembered without microphones." She watched Kala's face for the flinch people make when they discover there's a depth under the pretty they hadn't accounted for. Kala didn't flinch. She tilted her head. "We'd ask permission," she said. "And when someone said no, we'd leave it alone." "People don't always know how to say no to cameras," Aaron said, setting down the chalk. "Sometimes the lights make a person agree to a kind of immortality they wake up allergic to." "We'll be careful," Kala said, "the way people say we won't eat much when you invite them to a table already set." "Careful is a size too small for what we are," Hester said. The tow driver, who had claimed the step as his territory, scratched his jaw. "What if," he said, "we taped our own signs to your cameras that said NO last names and you can stop anytime and you get to see what we made before anyone else does?" Kala considered. "We could." "And what if," Leon added, "you waited a week?" "A week?" Kala blinked. "News cycles." "A week," Leon repeated, patient as a wrench. let us build shelves for the tapes and chairs for the backs that hurt and a ramp that doesn't slide when it rains. Then film the work, not just the tears. The room held its breath. Calla was the sort of person who could be either a problem or the exact right kind of help, depending on whether someone let her hurry. She looked at the chalkboard crowded with names and then at Zoya's scarf and then at the jar of screws and the Polaroid of Lucky propped against the safe. "A week," she said finally. "We'll come back in a week." She tucked the contract away like a salesperson promising to return when the homeowner could find their wallet. "In the meantime, make a list of what you need." "We need a bathroom," Aaron said immediately, because bathrooms are the unglamorous axis on which all kindness spins. "And a second kettle. And a sign that tells people how to come in when all they've ever done is leave." Calla wrote, fast. "Done," she said, as if lists could transform into plumbing by pronunciation. Also, she looked at Zoya, "You're a natural on camera." "I'm a natural with kettles," Zoya said. "Same thing," Calla said, and left before anyone could disagree. "Do we want that?" the suit asked, when the door had quit moving and the air had returned to its body. "We want what stays after the cameras go," Hester said. "We want toilets," Leon said. "We want a way to take this to the people who can't come to us," Aaron added, looking at the bus like you look at a horse that has already carried you and might carry you once more. They built. They are not builders by trade, which is why they were good at it. They made mistakes at the speed of gentleness and corrected them at the speed of consensus. Baird showed up with lumber and said, "Don't ask." The tow driver brought a folding ramp with scars in the right places. The suit negotiated a hand-washing station from a caterer owed a favor by a councilman who wanted to be re-elected by people who cried on buses. Zoya learned to drill straight, not because anyone told her how but because the bus taught her, lean here, not there, press, don't push. She learned to sand in circles while listening to a story about a grandfather who taught a grandson to make gravy without measuring. She learned the precise amount of force needed to persuade an old hinge to admit a new door. Calla came back early, of course she did, with a cinematographer who wore his camera like a violin against his shoulder. He stood in the doorway and waited. He did not lift the lens until Zoya nodded. When he filmed, it was the way people sketch in museums, a little self-conscious at first, then reverent, then invisible. "Say your name," Calla asked the woman at the kettle. "No thank you," the woman said, and Calla said, "Okay," and left the space where a name would have been empty the way you leave a chair unfilled for someone who couldn't make it to dinner. They filmed hands, hands on the chalk, hands on the rail, hands on the base of the kettle, the swipe of a sleeve wiping a window, the way a mechanic's thumb soothed a wire. They filmed feet, the shuffle of a man who had found his way back to standing after 2 days of sitting, the tap of a boy's shoe while he played his harmonica, a child's light hop that announced a body had selected life for another day. They filmed the drawer with Zoya's permission, but not the letters. Calla wrote in a notebook, "Drawer exists. Sacred. Boundaries respected." They filmed the cassette recorder, the way the tape has sounded like weather. They filmed Baird leaning on the safe, telling the story of Lucky as if Lucky had founded a nation. They filmed the tow driver showing the block of wood to anyone who would listen until the wood became a relic. At the end of the week, Calla wheeled in a television as if the 1990s required an audience. "Rough cut," she said. "You see it first. If there's anything that doesn't feel like you, we cut it." They sat on milk crates and chair backs in the ugly bed. The room smelled like sawdust and cinnamon and recent paint. The screen bloomed to life and there they were, the bus, the river, the ferry road, the block, the harmonica boy's hands, Zoya's face when she said "We'll say them aloud at dusk." The cinematographer had found the angle where the thrift store lamps looked like a constellation. The edit held its breath when people cried and didn't punch in for the tears. "Do you like it?" Calla asked, when the screen went black and the room remembered itself. Hester nodded, slow. "You made the room bigger without making it thinner." "The bathroom looks generous," the tow driver added, although the bathroom was not in the film at all. Zoya glanced at the drawer. "Only change one thing," she said. "What?" Calla leaned forward with the anticipatory hunger of the good kind of collaborator. "Put the names at the end," Zoya said. Not to list grief. To invite it to sit with us. Calla smiled. Done. The film went online. The town shared it like food after a storm. Strangers sent money in sums that looked like their rent and sums that looked like their pockets. $5 for screws, $50 for tea, $500 for the ramp no one would mind tripping over if it meant they could rise. A woman mailed a box of paper fans printed with the words "You can breathe here." A man sent 6 boxes of tissues and a note that said simply, "For all the words that fall out of faces." Permits arrived with the authority of stamped seals. The city amended an ordinance to include places that were buses and rooms in both. The library wrote a letter that said the teal room is essential infrastructure, and nobody laughed. Baird brought an electrician who whistled at the breaker panel and then made it safe in a way that felt like lullabies. It should have been enough. It should have been the montage before the credits: busy hands, soft light, a neighborhood whose grief learned to walk beside its ordinary. But on a bright, brittle afternoon, not long after the film's second 1,000 views, not long after Aaron labeled the seashells with their donors' initials, a man in a brown suit arrived holding a stack of folded papers and a smile the exact shape of a stamp. "Mr. Farrow," he said, and Zoya felt a clean, cold animal step into the room, an old fear with a new haircut. She had not heard her father's name in 2 years. She had not seen him in 11. "I'm Zoya," she said. He glanced at the key in her pocket as if keys made people official. "You've been served," he said, and handed her the stapled weight. "What is it?" Hester asked, moving so that she and the suit could both see the papers. The tow driver stood. The cinematographer, he'd been filming shelf building like a nature documentary, clicked his camera off at once. "It's a notice of claim," the man said. "From the estate of Wilkes and Quell Storage. They allege that during the unauthorized movement of a vehicle on city property," he nodded at the bus as if to name it, "you damaged their access gate on the ferry road." "We cut a chain," the tow driver said. "To let an entire neighborhood live through the night." The man shrugged. "The hinge was vintage," he said. "They'd like $8,000. Also," he turned another page, "there are questions about whether a vehicle designated surplus by the county can be repurposed for public gatherings without compliance with motor carrier regulations." "So, permits for grief," Aaron said, almost gently. "Do they come with instructions?" "We have permits," their suit, said, appearing at the office door like a conjured argument. "We have more permits than most festivals. We have letters. We have film. We have a block of wood with precedents." "Talk to the judge," the man in the brown suit said, unbothered. "I'm only the messenger." He left his card the way people leave seed for birds they don't actually want to feed. Zoya read the words once and then did the thing she'd trained herself never to do. She thought about her father's quiet in the months before he left, the way he folded his anger small as if packing a suitcase. She thought of all the rooms that had asked her to be quiet in return. Then she set the papers on the safe, a heavy square that had never held anything but a dog's picture and enough screws to build a small country. "We'll answer," she said. "Later. Right now we have a vigil." The vigil was for the woman who'd refused to leave the mill without her dog. The dog had been found. The woman had not. The vigil smelled like lilacs and brown sugar and burnt edges. People pressed their palms to the bus and thanked the metal as if it could carry their gratitude across, as if the old steel knew a shortcut. Zoya read the names. Her voice did not break. It grew. When she finished, the harmonica boy played the hymn from the tape in the river, still under a closed section of sky, somehow carried it back. After, when the crowd thinned to neighbors, after the kettle had its own cup to catch the last pour, after Aaron had erased only the question marks and left the names, Calla approached with the camera off and both hands visible. "We can help," she said. "Not the law. The story. People don't argue with stories the same way they do with ordinances." Zoya nodded. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tonight we sleep in the ugly bed and jam the safe against the door and let the bus dream about highways." They did. The night in the garage was gentle in the way tired rooms are. Baird's bed did not squeak. The safe did not need to be jammed, its presence was enough. The bus hummed to itself like a kettle cooling. Zoe awoke before dawn with the surety of someone who has been given a task by a dream. She slid the key into her pocket. She touched the drawer as she passed and thought, we are a chain that does not require locks. On Pine Street, the day assembled its parts quietly. A bird tried out a note. A cyclist tested a brake. A newspaper landed with ritual thump. The air smelled like the exact moment between burnt and sweet. Zoya reached for the bay door pulley. A sound stopped her hand. Not the soft click of a breaker settling. Not the generator's friendly cough. A metal sound. Outside. Not morning metal, truck, trash can, bike. A measured sound, chain, hinge, leg. A door that belonged to somewhere else. She stepped to the side window and lifted the corner of the shade. A white truck with a blue stripe. Orange cones stacked like a cheerful argument. Behind it, a flatbed the length of a decision. Two men in city vests. One held a clipboard, the other held a roll of strap. Her phone buzzed on the desk in the same breath as the knock. The suit's name lit the screen. Don't open. Hold. I'm coming. The knock came again. Polite, this time. A third time, with the steadiness of policy. Hester stepped into the office in her socks, hair like an orchard after wind. Aaron stood behind her, chalk-streaked hands empty and at the ready. Leon wiped machine oil off his palms and waited like a man at a finish line he hadn't expected to cross today. Zoya looked at the key warm in her pocket. She looked at the safe, square and heavy and full of screws and a dog. She looked at the bus, the drawer, the chalkboard stuffed with names that had learned to make room. The fourth knock, measured as a metronome. Ms. Farrow, a voice called through the bay door. We have an order from the city to remove the vehicle pending a hearing. If you open, we can do this gently. If not, a pause, we have tools. Zoya placed her palm flat against the cool bay door as if it could count her pulse. She was suddenly, absolutely aware of the fact that rooms in this town were always being asked to justify their existence: classrooms, bedrooms, break rooms, rooms on wheels. She thought of the ferry gate, the chain, the men who had carried blankets, the block of wood, the harmonica's note trapped once in a pocket. She took a breath. She reached for the pulley. And as her fingers closed on the cord, as the first inch of door rattled in its track, as the light from Pine Street knifed into the dark and made the dust look like stars, a different sound rose behind the city truck, low, insistent, impossible to ignore. Engines. Dozens. The tow driver smiled without teeth. Hester's eyes filled so fast it looked like a magic trick. Aaron laughed like someone released a held breath that was older than her. They came up Pine Street in a slow, deliberate file, valves chuffing, pistons speaking, city buses and school buses and church buses and campers and a battered bookmobile that must have escaped a retirement lot. Blue, white, yellow, hand-painted, new and ancient, windows like eyes. Drivers in caps and work shirts and Sunday collars. On each windshield, in tape, a word. Room. 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 The men with the straps stopped strapping. The clipboard lowered. A man in a city vest took off his hat. Morning, Baird said from the passenger seat of the first bus, a grin the size of the river in his voice. We heard somebody needs help moving a room. Zoya's hand closed hard on the pulley rope. She felt the key in her pocket like a live thing. She looked at the city truck, at the cones, at the flatbed, at the bus that had already learned its own answers. She didn't know yet whether they'd win the hearing, whether Wilkes and Quell Storage would accept a check made out in screws and casserole slices, whether callous film would soften a judge's jaw. She didn't know what rooms would be demanded next or who would kneel in the aisle with a letter and say, "This is me. I want to remember my own voice." She only knew that the town was louder than policy and that engines could be hymns. She opened the bay door. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.